The trading post door slammed open like a gunshot, and the whole room went quiet. Emma Hartwell stumbled forward, then collapsed onto the frozen ground outside, as if her body had finally decided it couldn't hold her up anymore. Snow instantly soaked into the torn edges of her dress, what was left of a wedding gown that should have meant hope. Instead, it clung to her like a confession. 4 days. That was all her marriage had lasted. Not because she quit. Not because she was weak. But because the man who'd ordered her like a piece of mail had revealed what he truly was the moment the wagon wheels stopped at his property, smiling in daylight, cruel in darkness. Her nose bled slowly. One eye was swelling shut. Her lips were split, and her hands shook so hard she couldn't even push herself up. The wind sliced through the outpost like it was angry at the world, and the cold didn't care that she'd been shattered. The cold didn't care that she was human. A few men stepped out onto the porch, drawn by noise the way wolves are drawn by weakness. "Look at that," someone muttered. A bride delivered broken. Laughter followed, thin, mean, hungry. Emma tried to lift her head, but the world tilted. Faces blurred together. Hats. Beards. Heavy coats. Eyes that didn't look like they saw a woman, just an opportunity. "Where'd you come from, sweetheart?" a voice called, too friendly, too practiced. A man pushed through the small crowd like he owned the air around him. He wore a fine coat, too clean for honest work, and his smile had the kind of charm that only existed to cover teeth. "Name's Garrett Ashford," he announced, like a performer stepping onto a stage. "I run the Grizzly Den, saloon, trading, lodging." His eyes slid over Emma, slow and shameless. "And you look like you could use a warm place to rest." Emma swallowed hard. Her chest hurt when she breathed. Every instinct screamed to crawl away, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Garrett crouched, close enough for her to smell his cologne and whiskey. "I can help you," he said softly, like a secret. "You won't have to suffer out here." She knew that kind of voice. She'd heard it before the first slap. Before the first shove. Before the first time she was told she owed a man because he'd fed her, housed her, married her. She forced herself to speak, but her voice came out cracked. "Please, don't." Garrett's smile widened, as if her fear amused him. "Oh, honey. Don't what?" The crowd leaned in, entertained. And then, a shadow moved at the edge of the street. Not a loud entrance. Not a dramatic shove. Just a presence, solid and quiet, cutting through the moment like winter cutting through wood. A man stepped out from between two supply wagons, and the laughter died in people's throats. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn buckskin and heavy wool, the kind of clothing you earned by living where mistakes could kill you. A rifle rested in his arms, not pointed, not aggressive, but steady, like it was simply part of him. His beard was thick, touched with frost, and his eyes were the pale blue of mountain ice. He didn't look at the crowd first. He looked at Emma. Not like she was entertainment. Not like she was a problem. Like she was a person. Then he shifted his gaze to Garrett Ashford, and his voice came low and calm, carrying farther than it should have. "Step away from her." Garrett blinked, then chuckled like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Well, if it isn't Silas Brennan," he said. "Mountain man himself. Didn't know you cared about stray brides." Silas didn't smile. "I don't care what she is to you," he said. "Step away." Garrett slowly stood, still grinning. "And if I don't?" Silas's eyes didn't move from Garrett's face. "Then you'll be the reason this town gets quiet today." A few men shifted uncomfortably. Nobody laughed now. Garrett lifted both hands like a joke. "Easy. I'm only offering help." Silas finally turned his head slightly, looking down at Emma. His voice softened, just enough to change the air. "Can you stand?" Emma tried. Her elbows slipped. Her body trembled. She managed to push herself onto her knees, and that small movement sent sparks of pain across her ribs. Silas stepped closer, not rushing, not grabbing, then offered his arm like a bridge. Emma hesitated. Because every man who offered help always demanded payment later. Silas waited. Didn't pressure. Didn't touch her until she reached. Finally, she placed her shaking hand on his sleeve. He helped her up like she mattered. Garrett's smile twisted. "What is this, Brennan? You adopting wounded animals now?" Silas looked over his shoulder, and his words hit like a final nail. "She's coming with me." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Garrett's voice hardened. You don't even know her. Silas glanced back at Emma. Doesn't matter. Then he did something no one had done for her in 4 days of hell. He asked. Not ordered. Not demanded. Asked. Do you want to come? Emma felt her throat tighten. Her body screamed to run, but she had nowhere to go. And in Silas's eyes, there was no hunger. No trap. Just a quiet promise. Her lips trembled. Yes, she whispered. Please. Garrett's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, he warned her, voice suddenly cold. You'll regret choosing the mountain. Emma didn't look at him. She couldn't afford to. Silas lifted his chin slightly, like a man drawing a line in the snow. She made her choice. Then he guided Emma away from the trading post, away from the crowd, away from the laughter that had nearly swallowed her. And as they stepped onto the trail leading toward the dark pines, the wind howled behind them like the town was angry it had lost its prey. Emma glanced back once. Garrett Ashford stood on the porch, staring after them. Not like someone who'd been insulted. Like someone who'd been denied something he already believed was his. Silas didn't look back at all. He just kept walking, steady and silent, as if the mountains had been waiting for this moment. And Emma, broken, bruised, and shaking, followed him into the snow, not knowing if she was walking toward safety, or into a storm that would demand everything she had left. The trail into the mountains didn't feel like travel. It felt like escape. Emma rode on a mule that moved carefully through the snow, its hooves crunching over ice and pine needles. Silas walked ahead, leading with a rope in one hand and his rifle resting easy in the other. He didn't talk much, and strangely, that helped. Silence was safer than questions. Safer than explanations. Safer than sympathy that came with a price. The cold burned her lungs. Her ribs ached with every bounce. But she forced herself not to complain. She'd learned what complaints earned. After half an hour, the outpost sounds faded behind them, replaced by wind through trees and the soft snap of distant branches. Emma realized something with a strange jolt. No one was following. Not yet. Silas finally spoke when the trail narrowed between two ridge lines. I need to tell you what you're walking into. Emma tightened her grip on the saddle horn. Okay. My cabin isn't big, he said. One main room. A small attached lean-to. A barn. A smokehouse. Enough to live. Not enough to impress. I'm not looking for impressive, Emma whispered. Silas glanced back once, as if that answer settled something. You'll be helping me keep it running, he continued. Cooking. Cleaning. Preserving what I hunt. I can pay a little. Not much. But you'll have shelter, food, and privacy. Privacy. The word hit Emma like warmth. Silas kept speaking in the same steady tone. Your room has its own door. Emma blinked. What? A door that goes outside, he repeated. So you're not trapped inside if you ever need space. Or if you ever need to leave. Emma swallowed. She felt her eyes burn, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Tears always gave people permission to treat her like she belonged to them. Silas didn't ask what happened to her. He didn't demand her story like it was his right. He simply kept walking, as if he understood that sometimes the kindest thing a man could do was let pain breathe. When they reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the peaks, painting the snow in gold and bruised purple. The place was real. Solid log walls. A stone chimney. A porch that wrapped around the front, worn smooth by years of boots. There was a barn with smoke curling from a small vent, and a fenced corral that held 2 horses and a shaggy dog with sharp eyes. The dog trotted forward, stopped, and studied Emma like a judge. That's Tracker, Silas said. He's careful with strangers. Emma slowly reached a hand out. Tracker sniffed her fingers, then, after a tense moment, his tail wagged once. Silas exhaled like that mattered. He's decided you're not a threat. Emma almost laughed, and the small, unexpected sound startled her. Pain crossed her face immediately, and Silas's gaze sharpened. Can you walk inside? He asked. I can, she said, because she needed to believe it. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and old coffee. It wasn't clean, not filthy, but clearly lived in by a man who knew traps better than brooms. A simple table. 2 chairs. A stove. A shelf of tools. A corner with stacked firewood. Silas took her to a small door off the main room. This is yours. He opened it and stepped aside. The room was small but tidy. A narrow bed with a thick blanket. A dresser. A washstand. A window with real glass. And just like he'd promised, a second door. Emma stared at it like it was something holy. Silas cleared his throat. I'm going to say this once, so there's no confusion. Emma turned, bracing herself. He met her eyes without flinching. I'm not taking anything from you. The words felt strange, like hearing a language she'd forgotten existed. I'm not your husband, he said. I'm not your owner. I'm not your judge. You'll work here if you want. You'll stay here if you want. And if you ever decide to leave, you leave. Emma's lips parted. Her voice shook. Why? Silas looked away for the first time. The fire crackled. The wind pressed its face against the window. Then he said quietly, because I know what it looks like when people don't get a choice. Emma didn't ask more, but she felt the weight behind his words. Silas stepped back toward the main room. I'll be in the barn. I'll leave food outside your door. Eat. Rest. You look like you've been fighting for your life. She wanted to say she had. But the truth felt too sharp. So she nodded, and Silas left, shutting the door gently behind him like he knew what loud doors did to a person's nerves. Emma sat on the bed and stared at her hands. Her wedding ring was still there, cheap and ugly and mocking. She pulled it off slowly, as if it might cut her skin, then set it on the dresser. A small act. But it felt like taking her name back. That night she ate stew in silence, the warmth spreading through her like something she didn't deserve. She washed her face carefully, wincing as she touched swollen skin, and she locked both doors, just to feel what it was like to have that power. She slept in short bursts. Every creak woke her. Every gust of wind sounded like boots. But in the middle of the night, she realized something terrifyingly new. No one came. No drunken footsteps. No violent voice. No shadow filling her doorway. Only the mountain wind, and the steady crackle of the fire in the other room. For the first time in weeks, Emma Hartwell wasn't bracing for impact. She was simply existing. And that was the beginning of everything. Morning didn't arrive gently. It arrived with a sharp ache behind Emma's eyes and stiffness in her ribs that made sitting up feel like climbing a cliff. She pressed a hand to her side and forced herself to breathe through the pain. Then she heard it, quiet movement in the main room. A kettle. A chair sliding softly, careful, like whoever was out there didn't want to startle her. A knock came, light as falling snow. Coffee's on the stove, Silas called through the door. I'm heading to check the trap line. You don't need to work today. Rest if you can. Emma stared at the door after his footsteps faded. No orders. No threats. No, you owe me. Just permission. Her hands trembled anyway. She dressed slowly, then stepped into the main room. The cabin looked the same, but she felt different in it, like a guest in a life that wasn't hers yet. A tin mug waited by the stove. Coffee, dark and strong. Beside it, a small plate with bread and a piece of dried meat. Not fancy. But it was set out like he expected her to eat first. That detail, small, quiet, hit harder than kindness was supposed to. Emma cleaned the dish without thinking. Then she looked around and saw what needed doing. Dust. Stacked pans. Floors that hadn't been scrubbed in a while. A pantry that looked more like a battlefield than a shelf. This was familiar territory. Work she understood. Work that didn't require trust. So she started. She swept. She scrubbed. She boiled water. Every movement hurt, but she had survived worse. Pain didn't frighten her. Losing control did. By noon the cabin looked alive. Not perfect, but cared for. When Silas came back, he stopped in the doorway like he'd walked into someone else's home. Snow clung to his coat. Cold air followed him in. He took off his hat slowly, eyes scanning the clean table, the scrubbed stove, the swept floor. You shouldn't have pushed yourself, he said finally. Emma straightened, her ribs protesting. I'm earning my keep. Silas stepped inside and set down his pack. You already earned it the moment you chose to live. Emma froze. Nobody had ever said something like that to her. Silas seemed to realize it, because he cleared his throat and moved toward the stove, pretending he needed to check the coffee. Your face, he added, voice low. Does it hurt bad? It's fine, Emma said quickly. Silas's jaw tightened slightly. There's a doctor in Timber Creek. He's decent. No, Emma said too sharply. Silas turned, not angry, just observant. You think if you see a doctor, word goes back to him. Emma's throat tightened. She didn't answer. Silas didn't push. He only nodded once, like he understood more than she'd said. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, a rhythm formed between them, careful, respectful, steady. Silas never entered her room without knocking. He never stood too close behind her. He never raised his voice. When he handed her something, he did it like he was offering, not taking. Emma learned the mountain routines. How to split wood without wasting energy. How to patch gaps in the cabin walls with moss and clay. How to smoke meat in the smokehouse until it lasted. How to keep the fire alive through long, punishing nights. Silas taught her quietly, without making her feel foolish. And Emma taught him too, how to cook something besides burnt beans, how to keep order in a pantry, how to fold blankets so the room looked less like survival and more like living. One evening, Emma dropped a bowl. It shattered against the floor with a loud crack. The sound yanked her back into another world. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She dropped to her knees, arms flying up to cover her head, shoulders hunched, breath trapped in her throat. For a heartbeat, she waited. For the blow. For the shout. For the punishment. Silence stretched. Then Silas's voice came soft, steady, almost like he was speaking to a frightened animal. Emma. She peeked through her arms. Silas stood across the room, not moving toward her. His hands were open at his sides, empty, calm. You're safe, he said gently. It's just a bowl. They break sometimes. Emma's face burned with shame. She lowered her arms slowly, hands shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered. Silas shook his head, almost pained. You don't apologize for fear. Fear isn't a choice. He crouched, still keeping distance, and began picking up the pieces carefully. And nothing breaks here that can't be replaced. Emma swallowed hard. Her eyes stung. Silas looked up once. I won't hurt you, he said simply. Not now. Not ever. The words didn't fix her overnight. But they planted something. A seed that whispered maybe safety wasn't a trick. Maybe it could be real. That night, Emma sat at the table and wrote in a small journal Silas had left there without comment. She didn't know why he'd given it to her. He never asked to read it. Never mentioned it. Just quietly placed it where she'd find it. Her handwriting shook. But she wrote anyway. Today I dropped a bowl and learned that not all men use noise as an excuse to punish. Some men just clean up the mess. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the cabin stayed warm. And for the first time since she'd left Pennsylvania, Emma felt something dangerous and precious rising in her chest. Not love. Not yet. Something smaller. Hope. The first snow of November fell thick and heavy, changing the world into silence. Emma stood by the window watching it, hands wrapped around a warm mug. The mountains looked like a different planet, white and endless, with pine trees standing like dark sentries. Isolation used to scare her. Now it felt like protection. Until Tracker began barking. Not his usual warning bark. This was frantic. Urgent. Silas appeared from the barn like he'd been pulled by instinct, rifle in hand. His posture changed, still calm, but sharper. Emma's stomach dropped. Horses. More than one. They came through the trees like ghosts, their breath steaming in the cold. And at the front rode a man with a badge glinting against his coat. A U.S. Marshal. Silas stepped forward, not lowering his rifle, but not aiming it either. Morning, Brennan, the marshal called, reins tight. Mind if we get in from the cold? Silas's voice stayed steady. What brings you up here? The marshal's eyes flicked to Emma standing in the doorway. Looking into a killing in Fort Bridger. Man named Marcus Thorne. Emma's blood turned to ice. Thorne. Her mail-order husband. The man who'd turned marriage into a cage. Silas didn't look at Emma. Not yet. He kept his attention on the marshal. What about him? Shot dead 4 nights ago, the marshal said. Word is his wife ran. Word is she might be staying with you. Emma couldn't breathe. Silas's jaw tightened. She's my employee, he said carefully. And she's been here for weeks. The marshal dismounted slowly, boots crunching into snow. 2 deputies followed, hands resting near their weapons, eyes sharp like they were looking for something to blame. The marshal's gaze landed on Emma. Mrs. Hartwell, where were you 4 nights ago? Emma forced her voice to hold steady. Here. A deputy sneered. A man saying so doesn't mean much. We're not, Emma began, but Silas cut in, firm. She's not my wife, he said, loud enough to kill the assumption. She's been here since early October. Henderson and his wife saw her when she arrived. She couldn't have traveled anywhere, let alone back to Fort Bridger. The marshal studied Silas for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly. I need to search the property, he said. Weapons. Evidence. Anything that connects her to the killing. Emma's hands clenched. Even here, even now, someone wanted to take her safety away. Silas's voice dropped, dangerous in its calm. You can search. But you do it with dignity. The deputies stepped into the cabin, opening drawers, checking corners, lifting blankets. They weren't cruel, but it still felt like violation, like her life was something people could rummage through. When one deputy moved toward her room, Silas stepped in front of him instantly. That space gets searched with her present, Silas said. And only the marshal goes in. Not you. The deputy bristled, but the marshal held up a hand. Fine. Emma stood in the doorway of her room as the marshal inspected it, eyes scanning the small space, pausing at the journal on her nightstand. He flipped a page, read a line, then set it down gently. You write about him, he asked quietly. Emma lifted her chin. I write about surviving him. The marshal's face softened, just a fraction. My sister had a husband like that, he admitted. Beat her until she couldn't see straight. One day she fought back. Nobody blamed her. Emma's throat tightened. I didn't kill Marcus Thorne, she said clearly. I didn't hire anyone to kill him. I wanted to forget he existed. The marshal nodded slowly. I believe you. The deputies finished. No evidence. No weapon. Nothing. Outside, snow fell heavier, covering tracks as if the mountain itself wanted this ugliness erased. Before leaving, the marshal looked at Emma seriously. Write down everything, he said. Get witnesses. Henderson. Anyone who saw your condition. If the companies push this to court, you'll need proof. Emma's hands trembled. I'm the victim. I know, the marshal said softly. But sometimes victims end up defending themselves anyway. Then they rode off, disappearing into the trees. When the sound of hooves faded, Emma sank onto the chair like her bones couldn't hold her up. Silas poured her coffee with hands that weren't fully steady. He's dead, she whispered. And somehow, I'm still not free. Silas crouched in front of her, eyes fierce. You are free, he said. And I'm not letting anyone drag you back into that life. Emma looked up, shaken. Why do you care this much? Silas's throat worked like the words were heavy. Because I failed someone once, he said. And I won't fail you. The cabin went quiet. Emma's voice broke. Silas, I don't want to be anyone's responsibility. Silas nodded slowly. Then don't be. Be your own. He paused. But you don't have to do it alone. That night, Emma sat by the fire, and for the first time, she told him pieces of her story, Pennsylvania, debts, desperation, the ad that promised a respectable husband. Silas listened without judgment. When she finished, Silas stared into the fire like he was staring into an old wound. I had a wife once, he said quietly. Her name was Rebecca. Emma's chest tightened. She didn't interrupt. She died in winter, Silas continued. And I blamed myself so hard I came up here to disappear. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You didn't fail her. Silas looked at her, pain in his gaze. Maybe not. But I've been punishing myself anyway. Emma didn't think. She just reached for his hand. Silas stiffened for a second, like touch was a language he'd forgotten. Then his fingers curled around hers, careful and warm. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines. Inside, the fire burned steady. And two broken lives sat close enough to share heat, still cautious, still wounded. But no longer alone. 3 weeks later, the mountain trail brought a rider. Not the marshal. Not Garrett Ashford. It was Doc Patterson from Timber Creek, older, stiff-backed, with worry carved into his face. Silas met him at the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder out of habit. Emma stood behind Silas, heart hammering, because news never came without consequences. Doc Patterson removed his hat, breath fogging the air. I thought you should know, he said. They caught Thorne's killer. Emma's knees went weak. Who? She whispered. Doc Patterson's eyes held something like sadness. A woman named Clara Jennings. One of his previous brides. Emma's breath caught. Doc Patterson continued, voice low. Everyone thought she disappeared. Turns out she'd been hiding, working under a false name. When she heard Thorne took another bride, she came back. Emma felt tears rise, hot and unstoppable. She did it, because of me? Because of all of you, the doctor corrected gently. She said she couldn't let him destroy another woman. Silas's jaw clenched. What happens to her? She confessed, Doc Patterson said. But there's talk of mercy. The judge is sympathetic, given what Thorne did. When the doctor left, Emma stood in the snow, staring at the mountains like they held answers. Clara Jennings had sacrificed everything to stop a monster. And Emma had spent weeks thinking she was still chained to him. Silas stepped beside her, quiet as always, but solid. You're free, he said again, like he needed her to finally believe it. Emma turned to face him, her voice trembling. Why does it feel like freedom always costs someone something? Silas looked out at the trees. Because the world is unfair, he said. But you don't owe the unfair world your life. Emma inhaled shakily. Silas, these months here, they've been the first peace I've ever known. Silas's hand lifted, slow, giving her time to flinch away if she needed. Emma didn't. His rough thumb brushed her cheek, gentle enough to make her chest ache. I didn't plan to start living again, Silas said quietly. I thought I'd just exist until the mountains took me. Then you showed up, and you reminded me I still had a heart. Emma's lips parted. Silas. His voice shook, barely. I love you, Emma. Not as a replacement for anyone. Not as something I'm owed. But as you. Emma's entire body trembled. She wanted to run, from fear, from hope, from the terrifying idea that she could trust someone and not be punished for it. But Silas stood there, waiting. Giving her what he always gave her. A choice. Emma swallowed hard. I don't know how to be a wife anymore, she admitted. I don't know how to be normal. Silas's eyes softened. Then don't be normal, he said. Be safe. Be real. Be you. Emma's breath broke. Then, finally, she nodded. Silas leaned in slowly, like he was asking permission with every inch. His kiss was careful. Not claiming. Not urgent. Just gentle. And when Emma kissed him back, she realized something with a painful sweetness. This wasn't a man taking. This was a man offering. Winter rolled on, but the cabin felt warmer. Not because the fire burned brighter, because something inside them had thawed. Weeks later, they went down to Timber Creek together. Not in shame. Not in hiding. Together. The wedding was small. Simple. No fancy dress. No big promises. Just truth. Henderson's wife cried. The old preacher blessed them with shaking hands. Tracker sat outside the church door like a guard. And when Silas placed a simple ring on Emma's finger, she felt the weight of it, but this time, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like choice. Months passed. Spring came with meltwater and wildflowers. Emma stood in the garden behind the cabin one evening, hands in the soil, breathing air that smelled like pine and clean beginnings. Silas came up behind her, slow and careful like always, and wrapped his arms around her, warm, solid, steady. Emma leaned back into him without fear. My brothers used to say the world only gives you what you're strong enough to fight for, Emma whispered. Silas kissed the top of her head. Then you must be the strongest woman alive. Emma laughed softly, real laughter this time, and it felt like a miracle. And when she later placed Silas's hand over her belly and felt the first tiny flutter of life, she understood something she'd never believed before. Some endings weren't punishments. Some endings were doors. And the day she'd been thrown out beaten in the snow wasn't the day her life ended. It was the day it finally began.